I guess that was my cue to start. Good evening, everyone. I'm sure everyone's had a long day, and I suppose there's still some interest in knowing what's going on with our world. So, the death count in the US due to coronavirus is up to almost 115,000 people now. And in many parts of the country, unfortunately, the numbers are still on the rise. But there's distinct pressure on the government to try and reopen as many things as possible. And per extreme happenstance, just today, the governor of New Jersey has announced that we're entering the phase two of reopening. In other words, several businesses are going to go back online very soon. They're talking about letting groups of up to 50 people congregate inside buildings and up to 100 people outside buildings. And several other things are being talked about, including barber shops opening up and beauty salons opening up and libraries and non-essential stores and so on. So while all of this sounds reasonably reassuring that good things are happening, at least in the state of New Jersey, but there's plenty of reason for all of us to continue to exercise extreme caution because this is not over by any stretch. Um, Unfortunately, the leadership on the federal level has been very patchy, and that's to be seen in the results of the curtailment efforts. The death rate in this country remains exorbitantly high, and it would be one thing if this was totally inevitable, but the reality is that there's many other countries that have done a substantially better job of managing this epidemic. I would give you the example of New Zealand, where they are now virus free. They have no active virus in the entire country of New Zealand now. Only 22 people have died, and they are essentially fully open now. In other words, their economic hardship is already over. And it wasn't any magic that they used. They used the very basic principles of infection control, which was to test very aggressively and then go after the contacts and then quarantine them. So unfortunately, we've failed in that regard miserably, and many more people are yet to die. So all the more reason for us to stay massively vigilant such that we can ensure that our families stay safe. This will pass, that's obvious, but it's not going to pass anytime soon. And the likelihood of an effective vaccine coming is unfortunately very low. Much of the hoopla you hear about vaccines is very likely to be not true because, as you know, there's still no vaccine for HIV, and that virus has been around for forever. There's no vaccine for Ebola. There's no vaccine for SARS. A very poorly functioning vaccine for even the flu. So we're nowhere near the vaccine. That is why we need to keep our guard up as much as possible. So here's some basics of how this virus spreads. We all have to realize that in most instances, there's just no way of knowing who has the bug unless they're being tested aggressively. And in the majority of cases, the symptoms that the virus causes in infected individuals are so mild that the casual observer would not even know that this person is infected. And the principles that I described already in terms of complying with the guidelines that we have in place, aggressive testing, contact tracing, quarantining, these still need to be adhered to as we reopen. The thing to understand here is that the majority of infections that led people to come to hospitals to seek attention. In other words, their symptoms were significant enough for there to be a need for advanced medical care. The majority of these infections were acquired at home, the scenario being that a healthy young member of the family brought the bug home and older, more vulnerable members of the family got the bug while staying at home. So that is the one thing that everyone needs to be aware of, that even while we are reopening, unless we keep our guard up and ensure that the more vulnerable people around us are cared for and are sequestered adequately, then bad things will happen. And obviously, it's not just the elderly or people with coexisting medical conditions that are more vulnerable. Even relatively young people have been known to suffer very serious complications from this infection. A classmate of mine from medical school died 3 weeks ago. He was an orthopedic surgeon. He acquired the virus at work. So everyone needs to keep their guards up. Now, what does it take for someone to get infected? What we know about viral transmission is that it typically requires about 1,000 viral particles, 1,000 viruses, if you would, to enter your body within a relatively short span of time. The vast majority of instances of infection with COVID has been through the respiratory path. In other words, you breathed in somebody else's virus while the virus was suspended in the air. So this is really the one thing that you need to keep your attention on, is that do not be in a situation where you are breathing in other people's breaths, because you can receive 1,000 viral particles with just one breath. And in fact, if your hands are dirty and you bring them up to your eyes, you can get enough viral particles from just one eye rub, and so on. And if you are around somebody who is relatively far from you, in other words, 6 feet or more, and they're emitting large amounts of virus in the air, and you are only getting 10 viruses per breath, you will still get the virus infection after 100 breaths. So think about the duration of time you're spending with people who could potentially have the virus. Now, how much virus is shed during the course of normal bodily activities? So if you're infected, if somebody actually has an active infection, with each breath, they put out about 20 viral particles every minute. So if you're very close to somebody, um, as far as distancing goes, and you're around them long enough, you will get infected. When you're speaking, you spew about 200 viral particles per minute. And again, it just takes 5 sentences for enough virus to be put out into the atmosphere for somebody near you to get infected. When you cough, you put out about 200 million viral particles. And when you sneeze, you put out the same number, 200 million viral particles. And when you sneeze at a speed of 200 miles per hour. And that huge viral load can go to the other end of the room, which could be as far away as 40 feet. So if somebody has an infection, you happen to be in the same room with them and they sneeze, the likelihood of you getting the virus is very high, which is why it is imperative that um, that everyone keep their faces covered continuously and constantly when in the company of other people. Let's talk about some unique scenarios now, because we're talking about resuming our lives. What about grocery stores? What are the things that you need to be concerned about. So one thing's for sure, you shouldn't go into a grocery store where everyone is not wearing masks. If you are in a store where people are not wearing masks, don't go in there, and make sure you have your own mask on when you enter, because there is still a medium risk with grocery stores because you're touching things that other people have touched. And if there is virus suspended in the air, these droplets that come out with each breath, with each word you utter, with each cough, these viral particles remain suspended in the air for long periods of time, hours, if the ventilation in the room is not good. So when you are in a grocery store, have a very distinct agenda in terms of being able to find things as quickly as you can, and then leaving the grocery store as quickly as you can, and making sure you sanitize your hands before you touch any other part of your body with your hands. Public bathrooms remain a major concern because there's many contact surfaces in bathrooms that if even one infected person has coughed or sneezed in there, everything is going to be coated with virus, and enough virus for many people to get infected with. So as we go to reopen, and say you're at a convention or you're in a meeting and there's many other people there and there's one bathroom that is now going to be used by 30, 40, 50 people, know that that is a dangerous situation. So you're going to keep your mask on, and you're going to make sure that you try and wipe everything down that you might be touching, like the toilet seat, for instance. So go prepared, carry your own cleaning supplies with you, and make sure you sanitize your hands effectively. 20 seconds of hand washing or using an alcohol-based hand sanitizer would be necessary. Restaurants, unfortunately, are going to remain a massive issue because there's no way you can be wearing a mask inside a restaurant. Um, and you're going to be sharing the air with a lot of other people. And oftentimes the ventilation in smaller restaurants tend not to be the best. And the virus remains suspended in the air for hours at a time. The one contact tracing study that came from Italy showed that one infected person sitting in a restaurant with 30 other people managed to infect 17 of them over the course of an hour and a half. So, unfortunately, restaurants um, are to be avoided. So, what else? How about workplaces? Workplaces and schools. Workplaces typically nowadays tend to be large rooms with lots of people in there sharing the same air. And that is obviously fraught with much risk for the reasons I've already outlined. Schools and universities remain very dangerous because ensuring compliance uh, from expecting compliance from young people um, is obviously fraught with substantial risk and worry. Our weddings and parties, again, same situation, lots of people being affectionate towards each other and under the influence of whatever libations have been served, guards being dropped, and the infection finding a very wonderful venue for its spread. Big conferences, again, really bad idea. Arenas, concerts, movies, again, not coming back anytime soon. And if you have the opportunity of going to a concert, until you know that the virus has gone away in several months, just don't do it. Do not go to concerts. Don't go to the movie theater, and avoid large arenas with lots of people, even if the state tells you that it's okay for you to do that. So before every activity that you undertake, it's important to do some sort of risk assessment and factor in all of the things that I've just mentioned to you. And that, is it an indoor space that you're going to be in? And if it's indoors, is it a very large, open, ventilated space, or is it a a smaller space with less ventilation. Obviously, you want to avoid situations where there's lots of people, and you could potentially go to other venues that have wide open spaces with fewer people. And minimizing the time that you spend in the company of other people is also exceedingly important. Because even with breathing, as you know, about 20 virus particles are emitted every minute. And if you spend enough time with someone who has a mask on and is yet still emitting virus, there's still a very distinct likelihood of you getting the viral load that is needed for infection to ensue. So that, in essence, is the recipe for survival. The way I described it to my daughters is that this year is not for anything other than survival. That should be the only goal that we should all have for 2020. This year is not about prosperity or the fulfillment of all of your uh, recreational and vacation related desires and so on. I think if you survive uh, to the end of 2020, you've hit the jackpot, is the way I describe it to everyone who will listen. So, on that very dismal note, I would like to see if anybody would like to open a discussion and see if you have any comments or questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Yes, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, or you could always type in the chat box, but you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Just want to make sure we only have one person talking at a time. Oh, we do have something in the chat box from Veronica. Thank you for taking the time to give this update in this ever-changing time. Thank you, Veronica.
This is Betsy.
Hi, Betsy.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yep, I hear you.
I have a question. I plan to go and stay at a motel down at the beach area towards the end of June for just like about 2 nights. Are there any other special precautions you might want to share with me for that?
So again, the basic principles that we talked about apply in this setting. I don't know what kind of motel it is, but typically motels and small hotels have hotel lobbies that have lots of people going through there. There are elevators that you'll be in close contact, that you will come into contact with lots of other people. You'll be breathing their air. So in terms of precautions, the best precaution is to not stay in a motel or a hotel. I love travel, and this year already I've had to cancel 4 trips. So I'm kind of bummed about that. But again, going back to what I said earlier, this year's about survival. So the way I see it is that the safest way to travel right now, if you're going to be traveling away from home, would be to actually rent a house or an apartment or a condo where you're not going to be sharing that space with anybody else. You're not going to be getting into tight elevators. You're not going to be in a hotel lobby. Once you get into a house or a condo, you have the opportunity to clean everything to make sure all of the surfaces are clean and the bathroom is clean. And then you know that as long as you're in that space, nobody else is going to be coming in. So that's probably the safest way to do it. And getting in a plane also is not a good idea at all right now, no matter what assurances you hear from people. So if you have the opportunity to not stay in a motel at the shore and rent an apartment instead or a small house instead, that would be the way to go.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. We do have another question that came in. Do you feel it will be safe for students to return to college in the fall?
I'm afraid not. First of all, I don't think colleges are going to be able to open in the fall. And secondly, I wouldn't want my daughter's in her last year of college at Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and I would not be at all comfortable with her going to college and being in large classrooms with a lot of other people and being in confined spaces in, with the partying that goes on and all the extracurricular stuff that young people do. I don't think it's a good idea with or without a mask on.
Thank you. Were there any other questions?
All right, good. So seems like nobody else has any questions. So I'm sorry for sounding as dismal as I do, but my concern comes from a fairly detailed analysis of the situation that we're in right now. And there's very little by way of a silver lining to what's going on in the US. There's other countries that are doing a much better job. For instance, in Europe, you have the example of Germany, where they've tested so effectively that their death rate compared to their neighbors in France and Italy are way lower. So there is a right way of doing it. Unfortunately, it's not been possible to implement that sort of program in this country, but it is what it is. So all the more reason for all of us to keep our own guards up and just survive this year. And the good news still is that this will pass, and 2021 is likely to be a much better year. And another year and a half, 2 years, it's very likely that much of what we love in this world, the restaurants and the movies and the theaters and the concerts will come back. But if we are in a rush to get back to all of those things, then we will likely suffer a major relapse of this epidemic. So again, on that happy note, everyone have a wonderful evening. And if you ever see me anywhere, make sure you say hello. Have a good night.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Oh, wait, one other thing. Oh, it was a thank you from Veronica. All right.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.